We will look next at the arthropods, or the phylum Arthropoda. Arthropoda means jointed leg or jointed appendage, and it refers to one of the more characteristic features of the arthropods. This is a phylum that you're familiar with, and it would have to be characterized as the most successful invertebrate phylum, if not the most successful phylum, period. Certainly the most successful in terms of diversity and in terms of sheer numbers. There are well over 1 million species. Some people would suggest that there may be as many as 30 million species. The number's probably somewhere in between that. Currently they make up somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of all known animal species. They're found everywhere in all environments. They feed in just about any way you can imagine. They have had their success as a result of several features. Among those features would be a very successful body plan. Really two components that have contributed. One is a tough exoskeleton, which gives them a great deal of protection, has enabled them to successfully invade terrestrial habitats. And then that is coupled with jointed appendages that allow them to move that somewhat protected body around in a variety of habitats. They've also used those jointed appendages to devise some feeding apparatus that have also enabled them to be very successful. We should probably add flight as another adaptation that has contributed to arthropod success, at least in the insects, where it has played a major role. One thing that's not on this list that we should add to the reasons for the arthropod success is a short generation time, the ability to turn over their generations very rapidly, therefore enabling them to respond evolutionarily to changing environments. In other words, they can evolve in a hurry. This has allowed them to very rapidly fill any available niches. I'll look at some of the features that all arthropods share. They do show bilateral symmetry, very clear bilateral symmetry in most cases. They are true coelomates, eucoelomate protostomes, but once again we see a coelom that is reduced to just certain spaces, in this case around the gonads and the excretory organs. We also see segmentation, similar to what we saw in the annelids. In this case, the segmentation is manifested a lot of times in the appendages, but we also see true body segments in a number of the groups, and in many cases we see fused segments into functional units that in this group are called tagmata. More about that later. Here's an introductory look at the taxonomy, which of course we'll go into in more detail as we go through the groups. We will work first at the subphylum level. In most cases we will divide subphyla into classes, and in some cases we'll even go down to the level of order. Depends on the group. It is a complex taxonomy, and we'll deal with each group individually as we get to them. Here you see the first subphyla we'll look at, and later on we will look at additional subphyla. Here are the crustaceans and the subphylum Hexapoda, which includes the insects. We'll be talking about arthropods for quite some time. We'll start now with a look at arthropod body systems, much as we have for the other groups, and as we have in the past, we'll start with the integument. The arthropod integument includes an exoskeleton, which is non-cellular and made up of several layers. The exoskeleton is secreted by the hypodermis, an outer layer of the epidermis. It's permeated with pores, usually has lots of CT that penetrate through the pores. Here you can see the layering of the exoskeleton, the external non-living layer known as the cuticle. You see in this diagram the living hypodermis, which is the outermost living layer, And external to that is the procuticle, which gets progressively harder as you move to the outside. That's the older material. And then on the outside, the hard epicuticle. Note the pores that penetrate the cuticle and the CT that move through the pores. The outer layer is somewhat waxy and makes it relatively impermeable to water, becomes increasingly more flexible as you move to the inside. The exoskeleton is made up of individual units that are connected by a membrane. This allows a degree of flexibility for the entire body that enables the arthropod to flex and to move. Of course, having a non-living exoskeleton creates a problem when it's time to grow, and as a result, shedding or ecdysis is a characteristic feature in the arthropods. As they grow, they have to periodically shed their skin, and here you see a cicada that you're familiar with in the process of undergoing ecdysis. Let's take a look now at the circulatory system. It is an open circulatory system. You'll recall that the circulatory system in annelids was typically closed. In arthropods, the heart is dorsal in position. It can take a variety of forms. Sometimes it's a contractile vessel like we saw in the annelids. Sometimes it's more of a box-like structure which contracts and provides the momentum to push the blood through the circulatory system. The respiratory system varies greatly from species to species. It really depends on the size of the animal and the habitat in which it's found. In some of the small aquatic forms, respiration is strictly through the body surface. In the larger aquatic forms, we'll see the use of gills to increase the respiratory area. And then when we go to the terrestrial species, they'll have to internalize the respiratory process, and they typically have internal tubes known as trachea, and we'll see that well illustrated when we get to the insects. As you might expect, the digestive systems are also quite variable. The mouth is specialized for feeding habit, and in this group we're going to see every imaginable type of feeding. In fact, that's one of the focuses that you'll see in the lab, or the way in which mouth parts are modified. About the only generalization we can make is that we recognize a foregut in the front for initial processing, a midgut where we're engaged in absorbing nutrients, and then a hindgut where we're preparing the undigested material for elimination from the body. We'll also see variety in the excretory systems. Most commonly we will see in many of the aquatic forms a gland at the base of one of the appendages through which metabolic waste is eliminated. And in terrestrial forms we will often see a type of structure known as Malpighian tubules, in which the internal body fluid is filtered and nitrogenous waste eliminated from the body. The nervous system should look somewhat familiar. It's not unlike what we saw in the annelids, with a dorsal brain connected to a circumferential nerve ring, a ring around the pharynx, leading to a ventral nerve cord, in some cases double, in some cases single, and then ganglia which innervate each of the segments.